Welcome to our breakout room about SDGs and living wages. My name is Pauline Osse. I'm Director of Wage Indicator Foundation. Then our agenda. We have a short video to get you all on board at the same level. And, after that, we have a discussion about why a living wage and how do you implement it. Panelists are those who are responsible for decency, fairness, and wages in their organization. We have Bogdan Pode from IKEA. Welcome, Bogdan. And the most courageous of all is Laura Garcia, I would say, from Global. They're running now in 20 countries, and that's a company within the gig economy. It's new. I hope Simon Braxma from Philips will come in soon. On top, we have Professor Katrien Termeer from the Socio-Economical Council. Our moderator today will be Martin Kahanec. He's the Dean of the School of Public Policy at the Central European University in Vienna. And Martin and I, we worked together for a long time about the living wage database of Wage Indicator. And I would say, Niels, can you start the video now?
Paying living wages is a serious business. It has wide ramifications within a company and outside. Let us see which are the most important. For reference, we take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, of the United Nations. These SDGs should be achieved by 2030. Living wages affect at least 6 of those. Sustainable Development Goal number 1 says no poverty. A living wage, by definition, reduces poverty in families. SDG number 10 aims to reduce inequality. Clearly, if all working individuals earn a living wage, inequality at the lower end of the labor market is reduced. And this is where it matters most. Number 5, gender equality, means to pay working women, working mothers in particular, a living wage too. This certainly is a master move, because by making women financially independent, their children benefit. Particular girls, who after their years become well-educated working mothers in their turn. A self-propelling cycle is set in motion. And good health fosters well-being. A living wage certainly makes for decent, more stable labor relations. This in turn means less conflict on the shop floor, less reasons to strike, more reasons to stay loyal to the company, less turnover of the workforce, less cost for recruitment and training of newcomers, higher productivity. And maybe less obvious, SDG 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. A living wage and decent work mean that labor rights are respected and put into practice. This is a strong contribution to stability and the rule of law in any country. Thus, by paying a living wage to all, the world becomes a better, less disruptive place to live in, as the global goals set by the United Nations are hopefully approached step by step, company after company. Experiences with implementation of living wages in companies tell us that it is necessary to prepare well. The implementation of living wages is complex and has many effects. It is therefore good policy to discuss the introduction of living wage in a company at length with staff, employees, departments like HR, compensation and benefits, human rights, and corporate social responsibility. In some cases, also suppliers might be involved. This whole operation takes quite some time, at least 1 year or even longer, depending on the size and complexity of the company. And it will probably cost money too. To find out how much money, one has to compare living wages with existing pay scales. Most companies thus far use the typical living wage benchmark as the starting point for their calculation. The typical family living wage reflects cost of living levels in a region. It assumes 2 working adults in the family, plus the number of children based on the fertility rate. The average number of children a woman is typically expected to have. One adult is assumed to work full-time, and the working hours of the second adult are approximated by the employment rate. The total income earned by these two adults is sufficient for a decent living standard of their family. Against this benchmark of decency, earnings of employees below this living wage level stand out clearly as insufficient, and the difference may be calculated. But what if one would want to set up a business in a new country? The territory is unknown. A risk assessment is needed. Is the labor law problematic? There still are such countries: Myanmar, Ethiopia, China, Bolivia, Pakistan, and Nigeria, to name just a few. And if the company wants to pay a living wage, what is presently the legal minimum wage paid, and how large is the pay gap to bridge? Yet another example of what can be done tailor-made comes from the gig economy. Here, a company does not employ personnel because it operates a platform. But it still wants to pay its workers decently. Then, what should be the hourly rate? And what about additional expenses? So the first answer was to use the living wage benchmark combined with the wages of employees in similar jobs. And on top, expense allowances should be added for job-related costs incurred by the gig workers. In the case of a delivery platform, this meant data of costs for delivery by car, scooter, and bike, as well as the use of a cell phone. All tools brought in by the delivery workers themselves. What do these few examples and experiences? Well, to say the least, living wage is no longer just a concept, an idea. Living wage is alive and making headway. It offers a way out and a way up. It pushes up the bottom line and sets pay structures on the move.
Thanks, Niels, for the lovely video. The video was, by the way, created the last week and fixed in Mozambique. But thank God in time here. And we are here. I know that Simon Braxma from Philips still tries to get in. So we can start with Laura, with Bogdan. Laura from Global, Bogdan from IKEA, and Katrien will anyway come at the latest moment. I give now the floor to Martin.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and I'm very privileged to chair this session with three inspiring panelists and Katrien representing a broader perspective. When I spoke to the panelists earlier this week, the one word that has appeared in the discussion was very much learning, and that's when we ask about what do you expect from this session. So let's facilitate that, and I invite the audience, the participants, please share your questions or comments in the chat box, and also the panelists, please, if you find a second to respond, please feel free to do that. Now let us straight away and go to the first question for the panelists that I have prepared, and that's the why question. Among several alternative ways of achieving SDGs, why have you put emphasis on the living wage? Why have you put it in the spotlight? And what makes your company particularly well suited for adapting the living wage? Bogdan, do you mind we start with you and then over to Laura? Bogdan, please.
Yeah, I was just kindly asking my child to stop playing the piano. Yeah, well, I represent IKEA and super happy to be invited in this panel conversation. I would start with our values as an organization, which are strongly people oriented, and those made us commit to respecting fundamental human rights. So for us, respecting fundamental human rights is part of our DNA. It's been a long journey since already more than 25 years when it comes to really working with human rights. But now that the different standards have updated and more clarity had come into the world, the next big thing for us when it comes to this is working with living wages. leaving aside values and commitments, the story starts with a real story from United States in 2012, when we realized that some of our own colleagues, co-workers on the on the shop floors, were not able to rent an apartment where to sleep. They were sleeping in their cars in the parking lot of the store. So that really triggered a profound journey in the organization to start understanding first, what does it mean to work with living wages? And then, of course, to learn how to do it. If it comes to the SDGs, I would say that the first one would be the SDG 1, fighting poverty. Then again, I think from there streams more connections that we're making internally just to make our own sense as an organization, because we're a living organism. An organization is made by people, and we need to make our own sense on why is it that we do what we do. So I would start with poverty, and then I would move on to fighting inequality. As you will see probably a bit later in the presentation, gender equality is an extremely critical part of our approach towards living wages. And I would add another one, which I have not seen in the video, which for us it's really important: access to quality education, because we know that as long living wages are paid, we can allow families to send their children to school instead, for instance, creating situations in which you meet child labor exactly because the family cannot sustain a decent life. So that's the connection that I can make really quick with the SDGs, if that's the question. And then, of course, the why is much bigger when it comes to the world we live in.
Thank you.
That's what I would have to say now.
Thank you, Bogdan. I see learning already going on. I see Pauline giving a good sign. Thank you for that. That's another thing we can add to the video and on the table. Thank you for that. Laura, over to you.
No, when I'm listening to Bogdan, I'm listening like that IKEA is like much more solid than Glovo, no? I mean, Glovo has born 5 years later, and things goes really, really fast here, no? So when I entered Glovo 1 year ago, I haven't any idea about living wages, neither. I mean, I didn't have any idea. So, but I realized that one of the first concerns and main concerns of the couriers were that they didn't feel that they were paid fair. So we started like to analyze what we could do to make sure that we were paying fair. And we started with the minimum wage, because for what I think, I live in Spain, and it's correct, no? A minimum wage. And maybe it is for Spain, but it's not for Kazakhstan or other countries where Glovo is present, because Glovo is present like in 22 countries, and there is Kenya, there is Ghana, there is Kazakhstan, Ukraine. And we couldn't make sure, when I compared what we were paying, whereas the minimum wage, there were like a huge gap. The minimum wage was too low. So that's why I started to do some research, and I discovered Wage Indicator and the database where you like ensure a living wage. And that's why we use this for our formula to find a fair earnings per hour, what we call earnings per hour, because the amount of hours that each courier does is very variable. There are some couriers that are okay doing part-time of their schedule, of their day, and others that they want to work all the journey. So we should be aware and ensure that we pay a fair earnings per hour. And that's why living wage is one of a variable in this formula, and it's becoming really important. To this, we add also the courier expenses, as I saw in the video, so we're doing good. We are including the courier expenses because this is an extra expense for couriers, that it depends on the vehicle, because it's not the same delivery with a bicycle than with a car, and that's why we are including this as well. So the why is because I think a minimum wage is not a guarantee that we are making sure that we are paying fair.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Laura. Now what we see is an up-and-coming company, global, which is very inspiring, and we have a globally leading multinational, IKEA, providing different perspectives a little bit, but there is one thing that a follow-up question for both of you. When Bogdan, you say commitment to human rights, that's of course very appealing to me. I'm coming from the Central European University, and that's where this is an enormously important value. And but at the same time, we are in business. Yes, we're talking business, and now we heard in the video, and that's also what Laura mentioned. It costs resources. Yes. On the other hand, okay, commitment to human rights, that's very nice. But then in the video, we also heard that we heard about employee loyalty. We heard about lower turnover of workers. So we heard some words which appeal to efficiency and productivity. So living wage, adopting living wage could enable companies to, to be more sustainable in the long run, yes, with lowering costs and maybe increasing productivity. Is this the way how you think about that? Is this in line with your thinking? Bogdan, you mind starting, and then to Laura?
And we have Simon now as well.
Simon, welcome.
I truly apologize. Technical
No,
hiccup.
but he's still there.
So. Martin, thanks for the question. I think that's what starts the movement in the organization, because we do talk about both business and people, and it's really hard to detach one from another. By the end of the day, whatever we are producing and selling, it's made by the people that make that happen. There are multiple case studies showcasing that there is business return when it comes to increasing employment engagement, loyalty, productivity, and so on and so forth. But I would say that we're not there as an organization. I think that those are assumptions that help us make the decision to start working with it. I would love to be in a situation of telling you we have done it, we have secured living wages all over, and we can already share figures in terms of benefits. We're not there. It's a journey that we kickstart as an organization. We know that it's going to be a long journey. We know that we can affect at a larger extent or a smaller extent, depending on where we're looking in the value chain. We can talk about that a bit later. But I think for us, it's very much, we call it a values-based decision, because frankly speaking, we don't know exactly at this point what we're looking at. We only know that it's really important to us as an organization to start looking into understanding whether there are any living wage gaps throughout the value chain, and what does it take to close them. Because we have business operations and suppliers in countries in which even today you have a 40% difference in between the legal minimum wage and the living wage. And it would be suicidal to say we're going to close that gap overnight, because you would also close the business overnight. So I think it's much more of how do we bring in our awareness that these gaps exist, and how we continuously make steps to make sure that we cover them. That's the approach that we take.
Thank you, Bogdan. So it's a journey. Laura, do you agree?
Yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, in what a good thing that I see that we have is that it's very data-driven company. So every quarter we fix this goal, and it's an internal fight with the operations team, because it's a trade-off to fix living wage versus to have a sustainable P&L also for the countries. So it's on our side, like to rebate this, and in fact we have numbers that in paying fair and paying good causes more retention. So it's a less cost on the onboarding, because if you have more veteran people doing the job, also you have less contact rate, so less costs also in the call centers. So indeed, it has a return, no? But sometimes it's getting difficult to convince where the P&L of one specific country is not sustainable. So it's a fight, I would say.
Thank you very much, Laura, and I welcome warmly Simon Bruxma representing Philips. Simon, we're discussing the why question. Why living wage? Why, among several alternatives, how you could have chosen? Why the living wage is the one that you're exploring?
Yeah.
Please, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and I think a question many, or basically all corporates and multinationals should ask themselves, why not? Maybe is a better question. And within Philips, we are a company with a strong heritage. We celebrate 130 years of Philips this year, in May, in fact, and we have reinvented the company many times. If you are living in the Netherlands and you go to Eindhoven, you still see the heritage of a Philips village, Philips schools, soccer club, PSV, and all kind of other things that Philips organized for its staff in the past, also schooling and housing and what have you. So we are a responsible company with strong social heritage as well. And what was interesting is that a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, during one of our shareholder meetings, we got for the very first time a question from an investor who asked to our CEO, Frans van Houten, whether he could confirm that Philips paid a living wage to its staff. And at that moment, he couldn't, but he thought it was a good question, really, and a relevant question as well. So after the AGM, we were kindly asked to investigate this, and we didn't know where to start. So fortunately, we got hold of Pauline and the Living Wage Org and some other people, and we started this effort. And later, as we in September 2020 announced our new 5-year ESG commitments, so the ones that we want to achieve by 2025, on the social pillar, for the social pillar, it was clearly stated that Philips wants to pay a living wage to its staff. We already could confirm that the year before, but it was basically anchored in the commitments that the Philips organization and the CEO made to its shareholders and to its staff. And by that token, there was no further debate, basically. The only thing we needed to do is to do the investigation and continue to do it year after year, because salaries change and also the living wage standard do change. But in the first year that we reported, we had to admit that there were a few people less than 50 within the 80,000 or so workforce that we had that were not being paid a living wage at that stage. Fortunately, because of the mandate by our CEO, we could fix that very quickly. And the next year, 2020 annual report, you can read that Philips pays a living wage to all its staff, and that will never go away.
Simon, that's very inspiring. Thank you very much for that perspective. Over to Laura. Before I give the word to Katrien, over to Laura, and we make another round with the how question. Yes, how question. How do you implement the living wage in your organization? What works, and what challenges have you been grappling with? Yes, what does it take to actually adapt the living wage, and what has helped you to actually overcome whatever was in the way? Laura, please.
About the how, as I was saying before, is quite easy because we have these quarterly targets. Our team is responsible to fix the EPH, the earnings per hour, for all the countries, and we track weekly, on a weekly basis, that we are achieving these targets. And we ping the countries that are not reaching the target, and we show it publicly to the whole company that we are not paying good in some countries. But we have indeed a challenge that is about the hours expectations. So, okay, we are ensuring we are paying fair on an hourly basis, but what about on a monthly basis? Because as I was saying before, we can't choose about the demand curve. So when our customers are placing the orders, and in some cities, this has like a peaks, very concentrated peaks, where we can't ensure enough hours for all the courier base. So this is the thing that we are tackling now, and we are like controlling a lot the onboarding, that we have a base that it's enough to earn fare on a monthly basis. And also we are thinking to incentivize those orders for the couriers that doesn't have enough hours to pay more in these orders, and to ensure like a fair monthly wage. I don't know if I'm being too technical in this, but this is our main challenge now.
I'm very pleased to hear that technology and data is helping actually and enabling in this sense. So I think that's a very nice argument here in the debate that can be helpful. Bogdan, over to you. How is that at IKEA?
I would share one slide just to support a bit my storytelling, if that would be okay, and you,
sure,
if you can confirm that you see it. And I would just focus your attention a bit on the left side, because talking about the name of the conference, Driving Systems Change, one of the learnings that we took for the last 10 years working sporadically here and there with living wage was that the topic itself cannot be worked with in isolation, but there are different other organizational practices that you continuously need to work with. I'll just give you an example. We're looking at factories in which, for instance, we know with certainty that co-workers are paid the living wage and above, but in the same time, the level of engagement, loyalty is pretty low. People feel disrespected and unfairly treated, because we do talk about decent work with fair income. So the question that we asked ourselves was, what is it that we want to do in order to make sure that we contribute to decent work and fair income? And for us, the answer was that it's not only living wage, because, for instance, as long as you don't have a strong social dialogue component in the organization, no matter how well people will be paid, they will continuously feel that they are disrespected and unfairly treated. They are not included in decisions regarding them, and so on and so forth. So it's limited time. What I'm showing you on the left side, it's a unique IKEA framework that we have created that guides us as an organization on how to address decent work at a fair income. It has 5 practices. You see them in front of your eyes. One of them is living wage. So, for instance, we do work with living wage, but as a component within different other practices that we want to continuously work with, because our belief is, from the learnings that we took in the last 10 years, is that only if you move all the 5 components at the same time and you improve them, you can actually create sustainable movements towards decent work at a fair income. Now, if this is the approach that IKEA takes that I'm showing to you on the left, we also pay a lot of respect to the fact that we are part of a bigger system. What you have on the right is we talked to our colleagues from H&M, and we received an okay to use their work, a simplified version of all the different actors that are influencing the working conditions for the workers. So I think it's also important for us as a multinational to acknowledge what roles do we play in improving the working conditions and the wages of the different workers in the world. And of course, as an employer, it comes very easy because that's where we have the biggest leverage. And as Simon was describing, if you have a strong sponsor behind you, it will happen overnight. Then we do have a role as a buyer in relation with our suppliers. Only on the home furnishing business side, the products that you find on the shelves of IKEA, we have more than 1,500 factories that we work with. Not to talk about the service suppliers on the retail side, and there we talk numbers of tens of thousands. So for us, we said we want to put together an approach that can guide us in how do we want to work both in relation to our own employees and the employees at our suppliers. And that's us as a buyer. And of course, we know that this cannot be moved in isolation. So for sure, we are going to use the leverage of a multinational brand for lobbying, advocating, because we need to support and to create a fair playing field in order to really move a system, not just individual units or coworkers. So that's the approach that we have. It's not just a beautiful framework that you see in front of your eyes. It's backed up with the assessment tools that we have created internally, which will help us assess gaps on each of the 5 practices, including living wage. And if it's to answer a question, and what do you benchmark yourself against when it comes to living wage? Well, we have Pauline here. We work with Wage Indicator Foundation to actually develop this component further. So that's the approach that we're taking.
Thank you. Thank you, Bogdan. Thank you. Excellent. That's really nice comparison of IKEA, kind of more emphasis on structural, systematic analytics. That's really beautiful and different for different types of leading companies. Simon, over to you. What is your lesson for us?
Well, basically, it roll up your sleeves and get going. So you can make a huge fuss about this, and I'm talking from a company, a multinational company that has been around for 130 years. We've got a global HR system that is called Workday, in which most of our employees are registered. The exemptions are really new acquisitions, and the biggest challenge, and because I've been sitting in all kind of fora as well. For example, the World Economic Forum recently launched an ESG framework that many multinational companies are being asked to adopt. And in the social column, there's again a question on salary and pay equality and all kind of other topics. And we were, quite easy, or we could easily answer element of the framework by saying, we simply pay a living wage, so no further questions. And then in this forum of the World Economic Forum, where I presented the Philips results, people ask us, but how can you get started? What is the living wage? And you can have a very long debate about all of that and, try to develop something yourself, which is, of course, an utter waste of time and effort. If people like Pauline have got a standard there, and we subscribe basically to the work that they deliver, we connected Pauline's organization with people in the Philips HR organization, who again have the people in China and in India and you name it, and we've got establishments, and together they work this all out. But you sometimes come to the conclusion as a result of the comparison, you come to some anomalies in your HR database. So, for example, we got people in Switzerland that were earning 15,000 Swiss francs. Now, everybody in Europe will know that that buys you a little bit more than ice cream in Switzerland, but you definitely cannot live there for 15,000 euros. So there was something wrong there that has been cleaned up and everything. But if your data set is good and you can source the living wage data from the livingwage.org or another institution, it really works well. And people like Pauline and others do have so much experience with this, and they're very friendly people to work with. So I can only recommend, just roll up your sleeves and do it, and try to act as not only try to act, but be a decent employer and a good corporate citizen.
Thank you, Simon. That highlights the values, of the company, and thank you for stressing that point. And yes, indeed, much praise to Pauline for initiating this. Now, Katrine, when you hear all this, when you hear the different approaches, when you hear what has been done, and I see also questions in the chat box, and please be invited to respond if you have a second. But what's your sense of it? How do you see? Is this? Are we doing enough? Are we going far enough? Is this? There is certainly progress, much to praise here. But what is your perspective? Please, over to you.
Indeed, there's much to praise, and it also shows that good data are very important. And having said that, I've also some questions to the 3 representatives of the multinationals. And I saw it a little bit in the watching story about IKEA, and that is that most of you talk about living wages for the people in your own company. To what extent do you also feel responsible for living wages for the other companies in the supply chain. IKEA, you were talking about the suppliers. And I ask that, but because I can also imagine that you can tune your own purchasing policy so that it's in the end will easier result in living wages for the other people. And for example, talking about your purchasing policy, we see that there are many aggressive price negotiations with people who are your suppliers. But that can result that they can't pay a living wage for their people. We also see that there are also due to COVID, of course, that there were last minute changes in orders, which also result that the companies in those countries can't pay living wages to their persons. So my question is, to what extent do you also feel responsible for living wages at the firms who supply to you? And then I understand it's a learning trajectory and step by step. So that's an important question from my side. And the other question is, and I understand it's also the topic of this breakout session, that the focus is on the social column. So equality, poverty, education, living wage. But we also know that there are some trade-offs with other SDGs, for example, those related to biodiversity and climate action. And I think because you are big multinationals, you also have to deal with those SDGs. I can imagine IKEA, deforestation will be an important element. And how do you deal with possible trade-offs between policy for deforestation and living wages?
Thank you very much, Katrine. So let's have a round. Do you mind if we start from in a reverse order this time, starting with Simon, and then Laura, and then Bogdan. Simon, please.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Katrien, or multiple questions, and I will try to address them all in a short answer. So first of all, coming back to the last part of your question, how do you deal with other SDGs? Well, we in Philips focus on 3 SDGs. Number 3, that is good health. Number 12 is responsible manufacturing and consumption, and number 13, climate action. And in those, we don't see a conflict with living wage, basically. But your question was really, a nice story about living wage in your own organization. But how about the supply chain? And that is something we did not start with yet. We do have a very extensive supplier development program in Philips, whereby we abandoned the process of auditing or third parties auditing our supply chain with a large checklist and then going away and then hopefully making a lasting impact. And we concluded that that doesn't really work, that there's no lasting impact of doing audits on site. But we've got our own supplier development team with boots on the ground in China and in India and what have you, who spent quite some time with our suppliers. Part of that process today is, looking indeed at labor circumstances. Is there a health? Is there a safe working environment? Are people paid overtime? Do they get a minimum wage at this moment? The local minimum wage. And what we will be evaluating within Philips as well, can we raise that bar to a living wage? And we all know that in many countries that is not an issue at all. But there may be countries, for example, China, India, Brazil, and others, where this may be more difficult. But that is, I think, the next step. And although we like to do everything as fast as possible in Philips, sometimes we need to learn how to walk before we can run. And we are at that stage at this moment, I would say, Katrien. So the short answer, the living wage is something we pay to our employees in Philips. And the next step would be the supply chain.
Thank you very much, Simon. And it does sound like the living wage is a global public good in a way where we might need coordination at the global level in some form. Thank you for that. Laura, over to you, and then Bogdan. Laura, please.
About influencing the supply chain, I would say we don't have like a long supply chain behind. So what we are doing is influencing the competitors, because if we are paying like higher in in a city, the best couriers goes with us. So we are forcing the other companies to also pay higher. So that's, I think that's quite good. And about SDGs, we have a team, a social impact team who has done some initiatives related to this, such as, for example, like empowering the electrical vehicles around the cities, like doing some partnerships with electric vehicles providers, and also about food waste, because there are like tons of food waste in the restaurants, that we are like collecting this food waste and like giving to people that need. So this would be like another SDGs that we are tackling.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. That's very interesting point about affecting competitors and competition. Thank you for that. Bogdan, over to you, and then we will need to wrap up this very inspiring session. Bogdan, please.
Yeah, I will start with the reflection as a project leader on responsible wage practices for the last 2 years and some more. One of the biggest challenges that I had to actually push through and help the organization get comfortable with the concept was that living wage is a topic that tends to polarize. So it's seen either in black and white. My belief is that there are always nuances. So when it comes to answering the question, do you feel responsibility towards workers at your suppliers? The answer is yes, 100%. Then comes a second question, which I think it's also worth being talked about, which is, and how much can you do about it, and in how much time? The picture that I have showed to you, the framework, is both for IKEA coworkers, employees, and for the coworkers at our suppliers. So we don't want to differentiate the approach, because by the end of the day, it's people contributing to our business. Part of the journey that we're taking this year is to start engaging a number of suppliers to invite them to start working with this framework, because not to make them pay living wage, right? But for us, coming back to what you were saying, Katrin, for us to understand what do we need to adjust first in our purchasing practices in order to enable this to happen at our suppliers, because we know that we're not perfect. We're operating with purchasing practices which have been written 20 years ago. It was different times. So our approach is that before we ask our suppliers to pay living wages, we need to figure out together with them, what is it that first we need to change? And with that, talking about purchasing practices to actually create that movement in our supply chain. And it will not happen overnight. You will need to prioritize. I see a question of, are you taking this also to subcontractors? You have so many layers of suppliers in a supply chain, right? So the question is very much about how do you prioritize? Where do you create movement? Because what we really trust is that it is a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. But extremely open to you. We need to learn as an organization first how to address this topic. So we're really looking at a very long-term journey, not about short-term fixes. So that's how we work with it.
Thank you very much, Bogdan. It's 5:30, and my notes say I should provide closing note, and it will be very, very short. Journey. It's a journey. It's a journey, and I thank you very much, Bogdan, Laura, Simon, and Katrin, for walking us through this, from walking us through your experiences, the easier parts and the tougher parts, the challenges and the opportunities. That's really important that we have a frank and honest debate about this. And I'm pleased to see the commitment, and I'm pleased to see the good spirit in this debate. Thank you for that. I understand. I hand over to Pauline. I just should also announce a video which will follow after this. But Pauline, please say yes, please, over to you. Thank you. Pauline, you're muted. You're muted. Please unmute yourself, and then please. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. Especially the questions we have for Tina and Boy, we can answer them all after. And these are questions about how the different organizations deal with trade unions, with living wages, with contracts, etc. We can deal with. And thanks a million, because you see that some countries like Philips just said, we do it. But Laura says in Global, we just do it as well. But the situation is more complex when you're a gig organization. In IKEA, I think it's also more complex than Philips. Maybe, I think. So very happy with it. And we should close, isn't it?